Hello, my name is Ashley LaPenta and I'm going to be doing goniometry and thigh circumference measurements for the CCAT practical exam. This is my dog Lainey. She is a left hind limb amputee, so I'm going to be doing the goniometry measurements on her, and obviously with the amputation she's going to be having some compensation, some restrictions, which I'll go over as we go through things. So I'm going to start with my hock joint here. So our landmarks that we're going to look for are the center of rotation, which is this lateral malleolus here, and then my proximal arm is going to be the lateral aspect of the crus lined up with the lateral epicondyles, and then the distal arm is going to be the lateral aspect of the metatarsals. And I want to make sure that when I'm doing this, I also want to have the stifle flexed so that I can get that full range of motion of flexion in the hock. So I'll go ahead and get set up with those landmarks here. Okay, and we'll do our flexion first. Okay, and with this, we are getting about 44 degrees, which is a little bit restricted. We want somewhere around 30-35 degrees of flexion for that. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my extension. With this, similarly, we want to make sure that the stifle is extended slightly so we get more of a natural stance, so we get that full range of extension with the hock as well. So my landmarks will stay the same. So get those lined up and get, I know, sweetheart, my extension. And that, we are getting about 159 degrees of extension. Which is pretty close. For that, we're looking at about 160, 165, so we're just under that. Now I'm going to move up to my stifle. And the landmarks here, we're going to be looking for that midpoint of the patellar ligament, which is right at that center of the stifle joint. And my proximal arm is going to be the lateral aspect of the femur lined up with my greater trochanter. And then the lateral aspect of the crus is going to be the distal landmark, kind of distal arm lined up with my malleolus there. So let me get this set up. We're at the center of the joint, the lateral aspect of the femur, the lateral aspect of the crus, and this is flexion, which is 46 degrees of flexion, which is perfect. And then we're going to go ahead and do the extension, and similar or same landmarks for that as well. Okay. And with that, I'm getting about 149 degrees of extension, which is a little bit restricted here. For this, we're looking at about 160, 165, but because of her compensation, she restricts a little bit in that extension. Now we're going to move up to the hip, which is a little bit tougher for landmarks, especially with her because her pelvis is actually a little bit tilted to the left. So what I would do is I'm going to find the tuber sacrali and the tuber ischiaticum and create a line there. And then I'm going to drop that line so that I'm on the greater trochanter for my center of rotation, and then have a parallel line running along there with this line that I've created with my hand. And that's going to be my proximal arm. And then my distal arm is going to be that lateral aspect of the femur. And we're going to go ahead and get flexion first, which we're getting 56 degrees of hip flexion, which is great. Okay, and then we're gonna do the same thing, same landmarks for my extension. And you'll see she's also a little bit restricted in my hip extension as well. So I'm just gonna kind of try to loosen her up a little bit, oscillate, and get, I know, babe, I know, some hip extension. Make sure my landmarks are staying the same. I know, let it go. There we go. So we oscillate a little bit just so we can get that full stretch. And with that, we are right at about 144 degrees. So 144 degrees, which again, also a little bit restricted. Here we're looking for 160, 165 as well. So we're gonna move up to my front limb. Start down at the carpus. And with this, the landmarks we're looking for is that center of rotation right at the center of the carpus joint there. And my proximal arm is going to be the lateral aspect of the antebrachium lined up with my lateral epicondyles. And then the distal arm will be the lateral aspect of the metacarpals. And again, similarly with the hock, we want to make sure the elbow is flexed so that we get the full range of motion of the carpus for flexion, and then extended so we get that full range of motion in extension. All right, so we'll get our flexion first, line up my landmarks. Okay, that is 36 degrees of flexion, which is really good there. And then for extension, I'm gonna extend that elbow, make sure my landmarks are the same, lined up here. And this is the only joint angle we're gonna expect to be over 180 degrees. And with this, there's a glare. I'm at about 17 degrees past 180, which brings me to 197, which is exactly what we're looking for that extension there. Now I'm gonna go up to my elbow, and my center of rotation is gonna be those lateral epicondyles there, or the lateral epicondyle. My proximal arm is going to be the lateral aspect of the humerus, which is right here. And then my distal arm is going to be the lateral aspect of the antebrachium. So we'll go ahead and line that up. Okay. And we'll start with flexion. And that is 36 degrees of flexion, which is great. And same landmarks for my extension. And that's going to be 160. Wait. Actually, I line that up with the carpus a little better. It's like 161. 161 for that extension, which is also great. We want 160, 165 for that extension. And lastly, we're going to go up to the shoulder. For this, we find the spine of the scapula, and we move down to the acromion. Right in front of that is the joint space. That's where we're going to have our center of rotation. And then our proximal arm is going to be lined up with the spine of the scapula, and then the distal arm is going to be lined up with that lateral aspect of the humerus. And when I'll do my flexion first, when we do that, I want to make sure that I'm getting into that flex position first so that we can stabilize that scapula as those muscles move back into that position. So I'm going to go ahead here, find the acromion, there we go, spine of the scapula, and then the lateral aspect of the humerus. And that's 57 degrees of flexion, which is also really good. And lastly, we'll go into extension. My landmarks won't change for this. And we'll get this. There's the spine. And I've got about 163 for that extension, which is perfect, right in that 165, 160, 165. Good job. Alrighty. And lastly, we're going to get our thigh girth measurements. So I'm gonna have her stand up for me. Come on, girl. Good job. Okay. So this, we want to make sure that they're standing nice and square. And then what I like to do is I like to come and take my tape measure and go up and get as high up into the groin as I can. And then I'm going to come and find my greater trochanter here. And that's where I'm going to have my crossover point to get my measurement. So I'll take my tape measure. I'm going to come up nice and high. Find my trochanter right there. And that's where I'm going to put my 0. I'm going to cross over. And that's going to bring me to a 36.5 centimeter reading. And we're all set.